Eddie Alvarez just added to the storm of backlash Dana's gotten over his comments about Francis leaving the UFC. But why did Francis leave? And what's he worth as of 2023? Let's start with his net worth, guys. The man was the undisputed UFC heavyweight champ until very recently, so you can bet he's been living it up, even despite the UFC's horrible fighter pay. Anyway, if we're talking specific numbers, Ngannou is probably worth upwards of $5 million. That's a lot, especially for the UFC. The man made $500K for every fight ever since he became the champ. And even before that, as his star power was increasing, so was the pay. $5 million is a hefty sum for sure, but guys, the UFC was offering the Predator a contract that would make him the highest earning heavyweight ever. He was set to make $8 million per fight, and yet he walked away from it. To understand why the champ left the UFC behind, we've got to take a look at where he started and what he overcame. He came from the sand mines of Cameroon. It was a hard life, and Francis's childhood was spent slaving away, working to survive. Yeah, from that to being worth $5 million is insane. The Predator has talked about it before on the Joe Rogan Experience. Apparently, his dream of escaping Cameroon was what kept him alive, and it wasn't an easy journey. The man escaped, but then he was stranded homeless in France. That's where he started learning how to fight in his 20s. Eventually, he made it to the US, and the UFC became his home. The UFC became what finally let Ngannou fulfill his dreams. So, why did he walk away from it all? Well, guys, the answer is in the Predator's past. His time in Cameroon led to the man developing certain values, and no matter how much money the UFC could throw at him, there's something that the now ex-champ values infinitely more: his freedom. And it makes perfect sense. His life of painful labor has taught him the value of freedom, and there's no way he's gonna allow anyone to take that away from him. So the question is, how did the Predator feel that the UFC was trampling upon his precious freedom? After all, they were offering him a whopping $8 million for 3 fights. Wouldn't this just confirm the fighter's ability to do whatever he wanted instead of getting in the way of it? Well, not according to him. No, money and freedom aren't the same things to this guy, and it doesn't matter how much money the UFC gives him if he's not allowed to do what he wants. Francis wants to box. Guys, people like Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder have expressed interest in the guy, and if he gets into a big fight like that, well, he'll make tens of millions, maybe even beyond $100 million from just one fight. Think about it. He's in his prime, and right now, he can call out a big name like Wilder to a boxing match. But couldn't he do this while still staying with the UFC? Well, no, because they wanted him to stay with them exclusively. As I said, they were getting in the way of his ability to do what he wanted. He wasn't going to be able to stay with the UFC and also box. Plus, apparently, the promotion has been extremely disrespectful to the guy over the years, and they didn't seem to change this attitude even as they were trying to negotiate a new deal. Yeah, Ngannou felt like he was being slapped in the face with money. Well, guess what? Now that he's a free agent with a single boxing match, he's gonna out-earn all of the UFC's stars. And you can bet Dana White's not happy about any of this. Yeah, he's been going off on the Cameroonian, and the MMA world isn't happy. That's right, the UFC head honcho has had to face some intense backlash for his comments, most recently by the legendary champion Eddie Alvarez. But what did Dana even say? Well, guys, he said a lot, and all of it was bad. He called Francis a coward. Okay, maybe he didn't use that word exactly, but he might as well have. In the press conference announcing the fighter's release, White was salty, and rather than wishing the champ well, he decided to take a much more petty road. Yep, the UFC president didn't hold back and said that the Predator was walking away away because he wasn't willing to risk fighting Jon Jones. This is a huge insult, guys. I mean, the guy has been willing and ready to fight anyone. He was fighting top-level fighters with one knee, for crying out loud. But hey, as I said, Dana's salty, and he's not in the mood to let Francis go tarnishing his brand. After all, it's a lot harder to create hype around the guy that ran from Jon Jones. As if this wasn't bad enough though, Dana decided to keep going, and he said something else that was pretty ridiculous and insulting as well. He told the press Ngannou was leaving to chase after money. I mean, I don't think anyone thinks that money wasn't a factor, guys, but he made sure to make Francis look selfish and kept stressing how the fighter turned down an amazing deal. Now, while it's true he turned down like $18 million, it wasn't all about the money. The man was constantly disrespected, and rather than meeting any of his demands, the UFC kept throwing more cash in his face. Honestly, Dana's comments after his departure aren't even surprising. They're completely in line with the disrespect any fighter that crosses the UFC precedent gets. And the MMA world wasn't happy at all. Everyone had something to say, including the ex-champ Eddie Alvarez. And knowing him, you can be sure he had a lot to say. He thinks no one in the UFC is afraid of anyone. Yeah, you can bet this man took issue with Ngannou being painted as a coward. The guys that fight in the UFC know how it is. Anyone that steps into the octagon is willing to put it all on the line. And Eddie knows this better than most people. The man laughed at Dana's narrative of Francis running away on Twitter and reminded everyone of who the Cameroonian was, one of the baddest men on the planet. Alvarez took it a step further and called out the UFC. Yeah, we love to see it. You can bet it was extremely satisfying to see this guy tell the UFC president that the fighters weren't the ones who were afraid. No, it was the UFC that was afraid of paying them. Honestly, this is all amazing on its own, but the American knuckle star decided to set the story straight. He told us what happened as Ngannou left the UFC. It was simply losing the bidding war for the champ. That's right, everyone is interested in the Predator. I mean, he's the undisputed UFC champ at the peak of his powers, for crying out loud. Of course, he's gonna have demands, and of course, he's gonna demand to be paid what he's worth. If boxing can give him things the UFC can't, that doesn't make the Cameroonian a coward or a money-hungry as Dana would like to portray him. No, it simply means the UFC isn't able to afford the guy. That was some of the craziest news around Ngannou's departure from the UFC, as well as his 2023 net worth. See you in the next one.